Hello and welcome to Creativity Uncovered. My name is Abby Gatling and I am on a journey to uncover how everyday people find inspiration, get inventive, and open their imagination. Basically, I want to find out how people find creative solutions and then how they use them at home, work, play, and everything in between. And my goal for this podcast is that by the end of it, you'll be armed with a whole suite of tried and tested ways to summon creativity the next time that you need it. Now, today, oh my gosh, I am so excited to be speaking with Andy J. Pizza. Andy is a hugely accomplished illustrator and podcaster, and you may recognize some of his works on adverts for Amazon, Nickelodeon, YouTube. I'm pretty sure he's even designed a Glastonbury poster, which is pretty epic. So we're definitely in the presence of greatness today. Welcome, Andy.
Okay, I got to live up to a lot there. I'll try my best. I did the Glastonbury 2015 Guardian Guide. That was one of the best projects, so I'm glad you brought that up.
So good. I mean, the breadth of your work is so cool. I was just having another little sneaky peek of your website just before, being like, oh my gosh, there are so many exciting projects. I want to dive into all of them, but for context, obviously you can tell I'm fangirling a little bit right now, but Andy, I wanted to reach out to you because I kind of need to thank you partially for helping me start this podcast, because last year I was actually on a long haul to the US and I came across this creative series you did about finding your creative style. And I just binge watched the entire thing. It was fantastic. And I think that it helped click something in my brain. And so throughout that entire trip, things were whirring away. And by the end of it, I was like, I'm making this podcast. So thank you, firstly. And I also want to go, how did you get into that series? How did that come about?
What was that on the podcast or was that a class?
It was one of your masterclasses. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Did you see it on a plane?
I did.
Okay. That's just a funny, weird thing that I didn't know I did a class with Skillshare and they put it on planes. So it's on one of the airlines has this on there, which is very bizarre, very weird. Yeah, I did that style class because I think when I first started as an illustrator, I went to school and I was like, all my favorite illustrators have a style. I need to spend my time at school finding a style. It seems like pretty important. And I think when I expressed this to my teachers, I was just kind of met with, like, I had some great teachers, but early on, I felt like when I would say I need to find my style, their vibe back would be the kind of overly mystical mindset that you sometimes find in the creative world. And it was kind of like, find your style finds you if you're lucky. And I'm like, dude, I'm paying you. This isn't luck. Like, I got to figure this out, man. And so I think the first few years I was so panicked about what to do because this is what I chose to do as a job that I was just making work that was trendy. And I was authentically into it and I still like that stuff that I made, but it wasn't anything deeper than this is kind of like the trends of the moment. And I'm trying to put my spin on it, but it's not speaking to why I wanted to make creative work. And I don't feel like I'm putting myself in it. And so I really felt like I was just stumbling through the dark for several years, trying to figure out who am I, like, and how do you put that into a drawing? And so I didn't know if I was making any progress. And then eventually a handful of things clicked. And I just wanted to kind of simplify those ideas into a few step-by-step things that aren't magic, but I do think if I would have had that, it would have saved me years. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then as I also, as I developed in my creative practice and have gone along and kind of dove into depth psychology and, stuff like that, I've realized that some of the stuff that I was doing, there's like a real precedent. Whether it's like Jungian psychology or active imagination or kind of psychoanalytic way of thinking about symbolism and stuff like that. And so, yeah, the further I go, the more convinced I am that there are pretty practical things that you can do to help project your inner world onto a page in a way that is authentic. So I think that is kind of where it came from.
Oh, that's so cool. I love the fact that there's so much depth to your illustrations, that it's not just that it looks snazzy on a piece of paper or on a big mural or whatever you're doing at the time, but it's actually thought that goes into it and research and stuff. But how do you actually jump into that from going, oh, this looks nice, to actually going, I want to find out why this looks nice, or why is this meaningful?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. I think it starts with believing that there's treasure there. Like, you're never going to dig in if you don't think there's treasure in there, right? Like, you gotta have some belief. And I find that that's one of the early hurdles that a lot of creators struggle with. And I really struggled with is I started gathering all of this inspiration and what now I've heard called in the psychology world, psychically charged images. So like symbols that were reoccurring in my favorite things. And at first I just kind of felt like, oh, why do you like these? Because they're cool. Like, that was it. Like, because it's cool. And I think that, the obstacle that I think is easy to trip up on is you don't believe that you are deep as a person. You don't believe that you have any other layers. You don't believe that the reason these things are resonating goes beyond like you're just trying to be cool or, whatever. And so I think that, I think that's the real first step is gathering this stuff, having the faith that there is something worth cultivating here. There is something worth these connections actually go beyond just trying to seem fashionable or cool or whatever. And, having the faith to dig into them and reflect on them, because that's the thing whenever I've like taught or worked with other creators, that's the first stumbling block is getting past, why do you like this? Because it's cool. I don't know. Like, I think you have to go beyond that. And it's kind of the same thing you see in like dream interpretation. And I think dream interpretation is, there's a lot of opinions on this, especially, experts in the field, researchers. I feel like the jury's really out on what is a dream. Is it totally random? Is it not totally random? I think for me personally, where I can set up camp, I'm endlessly fascinated with dreams. And there are images of our inner world. So that's really rich as a creator, as an illustrator or whatever. That's like all imagery that you kind of own. So like, that's good stuff to like work from. But I feel, even though I don't really know what dreams are exactly, what I do feel certain of is that they're kind of like your deep self writing you a poem about how you're feeling. So it might not be more than that, but it is always emotionally charged. And those emotions are always showing up as pictures. And in the most kind of basic way, that is symbolism. That's metaphor. And I'm talking about that because in the same way, it's easy to wake up from a dream and just say, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's just random stuff bubbling up. But in that same way that with your own taste and interests, you can say, oh, maybe there's something beyond this just being cool, and trust that it's connected to something inside of you. Is that an answer? I don't even remember what you asked anymore, but that's some stuff.
It sounded good, so I'm happy with that.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the dream thing, because I just only a couple of weeks ago interviewed someone who helps people remember their dreams better, because she believes that it is actually your deep subconscious. Your brain is ticking away whether you're awake or not, and if you can remember as much of your dreams as you can choose to do with it as you will. You can choose to be inspired for your creativity, or it might help you solve this problem that you've been trying to work on. So I'll definitely flick you that episode.
Cool. That's
But
awesome.
I love the fact that your creativity is so deeply grounded in curiosity and following that, pulling that thread and seeing where it goes. Do you think that that is something that everyone needs to have to be a creative?
Yeah, I think so. I think you do. I mean, I think you have to be able to give yourself permission to be curious and let that kind of, I think especially as someone with ADHD, I feel like I realized, like, kind of watching my mom struggle with similar tendencies. I think I knew in a way that I'm not in control of, I'm not completely in control of what I'm curious about. So I think that there is a way. It's kind of Curious George, like, you just have to follow him. You can't, like, you could try to box it in, but it's gonna, like, find a way out and find it. And so I think even from when and it's pretty difficult to, like, build your life around that, because it is out of control. It's not I heard someone today actually talking about how on Twitter, talking about how they don't like the idea of ADHD being a superpower. And I totally relate to what they're saying 100%. And I had a thought, then, like, a couple of tweets down in replies, someone said the same thing, which it's like a superpower that you can't control. So it's like you have laser eyes but you can't turn them off. You don't get to tell them when they turn on, like, because you don't get to control your curiosity and your hyper focus. It's kind of out of your control. And I think that, I think creativity is at least partially about letting that curiosity run wild, and kind of just following it where the life is. But the other piece to it is being curious about yourself. And I think one of my kind of go-to core values as a creator is the idea that, art is self-expression, and you're never going to love the work that you make. You're never going to love that self-expression if you hate the thing it's an expression of, which is yourself. So you have to be curious about yourself. You have to love yourself if you're ever going to love your work. And I think that for me, that was another big breakthrough for style. Was I think I had a big shift in my mid-20s from a real negative psychology to what to a positive psychology, which is it's not toxic positivity. It's none of that. It's a positive psychology, meaning rather than just saying, here's what's wrong with you and broken and needs to, these are your disorders. Positive psychology is this massive movement around believing that you're maybe ultimately a good thing. And when you do feel that way, you can be really curious, because you can open up those doors, because you think, well, even if it looks scary from the outside, maybe there's a positive reason why this feature or behavior developed. And I think more than anything in terms of art, that self-curiosity is really key.
So if your stuff is really this personal expression, do you ever feel really exposed having it out there for the world to see?
Yeah, I do. I do feel that way. I think that I have, luckily, from pretty early on, felt the need to create boundaries around certain aspects. There are certain areas, like I mentioned my mom earlier. That's a thing that I have been really open about, my relationship to my mom and how that relates to my relationship with being someone who's ADHD. Those are things that I've been extremely open about. But there are a lot of other things that I don't like. I try pretty much to never talk explicitly about my kids, their names, their likeness. Like, I try not to get into any of that. There are certain aspects of my story that I don't share because I don't really feel like they're public. They're not related to my I don't need to be explicit about every aspect of that. But even those things show up in the work in a way that might just be symbolic. So I think that I do sometimes feel that way. I do, the thing that I probably feel most vulnerable about is, for instance, having a podcast for 9 years. There are things looking back on that when I think about my position on something or how I showed up in that particular episode, I always know that I was being authentic. Like, it's very rare that I wasn't being authentic, but so I wasn't ever lying, but I might disagree with myself now. So, like, looking back, that's kind of the most vulnerable I feel, is like, I wish I could just clarify things or go, disagree with myself or throw off things that I used to hold dearly, and I just feel like, I got those things wrong, and I wish I hadn't said that. But I think that's the nature of having a public art practice too. I'm sure lots of musicians feel like that about songs they wrote or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and it's such a human thing to evolve, and you change your views, you change your viewpoints, and you learn more, but you can't go back and apologize for everything. You'd have a retraction for every episode or something like that. So if it is such a public life and there are some things that you don't want to necessarily share with the whole wide world, do you ever make art that is just for yourself and for your family to consume?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common complaint about what happens when you make your passion your job, is that you don't have as much left for yourself, and it kind of changes the nature of this thing that you love, because now it's an obligation. So there definitely is that aspect of it. However, I think over the past few years, especially, it's been kind of intermittent, but I have done more like journaling and writing out and sometimes drawing my dreams and stuff of that nature. So that would be probably the most, that would probably fall into that bucket more than anything else, of like, I've become increasingly interested in dreams as a personal journaling practice. And that stuff sometimes bleeds out into my professional practice, but that's probably the most personal stuff that I do.
Yeah. If you're doing a lot of this reflective stuff and diving deep into your understanding of your art, is your art evolving with that as well because of that?
Yeah. I mean, yes. I think that I've been on a weird little bit of a hero's journey with illustration over the past 10 years in a way, because when I started the podcast 9 years ago, that was on the back of a talk that I did, and I had like really had this incredible experience telling stories on stage just with this little local talk that I did. And I wanted to turn that into a bigger part of my practice. And I got so into it that I was like, I like this more than I like illustration. And I had already built an illustration practice. And I was like, I don't know what it is, but it's these analogies and these metaphors and these stories. Like, this feels like the most supercharged thing. And so I really think emotionally, I left illustration for a little bit, and I was diving into this like public speaking, live storytelling thing. And illustration just kind of became part of my job. And then it wasn't until I heard some public speaker call one of their metaphors an illustration. They're like, hey, I'm just going to give you this illustration. And I was like, they're the same thing. Like, what's going on? So I think that was the first like little bit. And then as I dove deeper into really like dream psychology and started to understand, I think, looking back, I'm like, man, there were definitely smarter kids than me in high school that when we were reading like classic literature, like got symbolism in the way that I feel like I'm only just figuring out. Like, and so right now I'm having this like rekindled love affair with illustration where like I really do. My favorite definition of illustration is writing with pictures. And I really do feel that way. And I feel like that's what I'm practicing is the art of finding the right symbols to illustrate a point. And I've just kind of, that's been one of the biggest evolutions as of late is that I have fallen back in love with illustration and it's in the power of symbolism. And so, yeah, I think always, and I'll say this, I'll add this little bit because it kind of gets back to what I think your original question was, is when I started getting into picture books and wanting to move in that direction, which started probably as far back as 2012, I was, met with a lot of people telling me about story structure and all these kind of things. And at first I wasn't interested. I think partially because I just thought, I'll never figure that out. Like, that's not me. It's not, I don't get it. But then at the same time, on a kind of spiritual journey, I was diving into Joseph Campbell, and I didn't see the connection between those two things. I didn't think that it had anything to do with it. And then I read Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is his book all about the hero's journey. And then I had heard about a more simplified version of that, which is called the writer's journey. And I read that. But I wasn't reading it as a writer or a storyteller. I was reading it as a kind of spiritual text because it was like helping me understand my life a lot better. And so it wasn't until I was like way far into that and then finally got into picture books and I was doing the podcast. I was like, oh, these are all the same thing that I'm doing. And so I feel like there is always I do think like personal development is really often precedes creative development. And then sometimes creative development unlocks personal development. So I feel like they're always kind of arm in arm.
Yeah. I love that all these things are coming together perfectly for you at the right time, because you got to be open and ready to receive that information, don't you? And
yeah, you do.
Talking about being creative for work and then trying to sustain your creativity outside of that, that's certainly a common thing that is talked about on this podcast. So you sort of pivoted more towards the public speaking and things like that. But what are your other sort of go-tos when you just are in a creative funk, if you're ever in a creative funk?
I'm in a creative funk right now. I'm like deep in a creative funk. And I think I think there's probably a million reasons why that is. And I think that, I'm pretty convinced that creative funks I'm not saying you should just like lean into them and accept that you suck and just, whatever, roll over and take it. I'm not saying that, but I do think also they are part of the creative seasons. I think that there's a degree. And, I heard Liz Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love and Big Magic, say that, the economy and just kind of the way that our world is set up, we kind of feel like the only acceptable trajectory is that, line graph of the line going up and to the right forever. Whereas life, if you think even just like the seasons of the year, that's not how it works. Like you're going to have like, ups and downs and winters and summers and spring, all that. Like it's going to kind of take those trajectories. So I think sometimes when I just get a little bit burnout or something, I have a lot of like tricks and things that I can do, and I'll maybe get into that. But I feel like right now I'm in a creative funk that I've had to just say, yeah, it's happening, man. I can't, there's not much I can do about it. It's not like I don't have different things that are bringing me joy or that there aren't like creative breakthroughs that have come in this time. I just think at the start of another cycle of creative output. And it's in this period of time, I think it's really confusing. I think you just get into a very confusing state that yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I've said this before too, like the first the first piece of getting found is admitting you're lost. Like when you're lost and you don't want to admit it, you usually just get more and more lost until you stop and you're like, hey, I'm going to ask for directions because I'm definitely lost. Like, so I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's like, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in a weird place. I can't find my way out of here. But yeah, so I would say that is often the first thing. But I also think like one thing that has been really helpful is sometimes I'll get way off the map and I'll stop and think, when was the last time I remember that curiosity going on fire? Like, when was that? And can I go return to that and see if there's anything unexplored for that? And that honestly, like that on several occasions have put me back on the path. And so, yeah, I would say when I'm creatively blocked, that'll be the first thing that I do.
That's cool. I love learning how people can get back on track and shake off the funk. And for me, it's the podcast is that I love talking to people about creativity, and that helps me feel more creative. And your podcast, Creative Pep Talk, I know we've spoken about it a few times. Very cool, very interesting, and some amazing guests on there. Does that also help you like reinvigorate?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so. About 2/3 of the episodes are just solo episodes, and that's kind of been the core of the podcast. But then I would say like the past few years, I've probably been as interested in that, if not more interested in the interviews and conversations. Like you said, it gives you maybe you said this in another episode that I was listening to, maybe you said it today, I don't know. But it gives you an excuse to strike up a conversation with someone that you find interesting. And so that has been extremely valuable. And I think that I've been able to mold it to my curiosity as well and figure out ways to kind of talk to a lot of people in different fields and different mediums and relate it back to creative practice. And yeah, I would say, well, I mean, more than anything, the creative the podcast is just my current creative practice. And I'm a really, really big believer in the idea of having a practice and a discipline, because I make, something like 40 some episodes a year, and that ends up being 40 pieces of episode art. And out of those pieces every year, I'm able to cobble together a calendar that we release every year. And I would say I can find 12 of those 40 that are good pieces of work, but there's not a lot more than that. Like maybe 15, like so that's a great indicator of like what's so great about a creative practice is that through that quantity, you're able to play and make mistakes and make stuff that didn't work. And if you make 40 things, 15 of them will probably be pretty cool, or like you'll be into them. You know what I mean? So I think that more than anything, that's what the podcast is. It's just a framework for having a habit and a practice and a discipline. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely having a bit of a routine is fantastic. What does your normal day look like? If you've got so many things going on.
Definitely don't have a normal day. I'm trying, I think that I mean, I have certain things that ground it. So I have this, I don't know anybody that does this. So this is just a weird thing about me, but every day I take about an hour long bath. That's weird. I feel like it's weird. Nobody does that. I don't know, but
I
I
love
could,
it.
that's my grounding, like that every day. And I mean, pretty much every single day. I'll take a bath for an hour to an hour and a half. And that always starts with, it always starts with
Just imagine how wrinkly you are when you get out.
yeah, pretty wrinkly. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I wonder. I'm curious about a lot of different aspects of it. I think it's usually a really hot bath, and from what I've read, that kind of raises your like dopamine receptors and levels or whatever, and that's a necessary thing for ADHD people. So I think that's part of it. My mom also took a lot of baths, and so I think that's probably part of it. And then another part of it, maybe it's sensory deprivation, where it's like I can think clearer in water. I also love the ocean, and hot tubs. Like I love water. And so I always start with reading. So I always read something. I'm always reading a book, and I'm a pretty slow reader, but I'm reading every day. And then I'm usually writing. So I'm usually writing either the podcast or journaling or writing about my dream or, whatever, or picture book related stuff. And so it's always a daily practice of that. But then I also try to kind of, before I start my day, I'll usually bring my kid to school, one of my three children to school. And I really desperately try to do the thing that I have to do that day first. That is the number one thing. But that could be a whole bunch of different things because, like you said, I have a lot of different moving parts. So that could be recording a podcast. That could be working on picture book thing. That could be doing email. That could be doing client stuff. Could be planning a talk. And so all of those things kind of change. But the other piece that stays the same every week is that I have Monday and Tuesday and then Wednesday morning and Thursday morning all as like deep work time. And so I try to not schedule calls and meetings on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning or Thursday morning. And I can't always do that. Sometimes you have to schedule stuff in there, but that blocking out time is probably the most essential thing to getting any creative work done. So those things don't change, but what I do in those times always changes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like a loose structure or framework with flexibility in there. Because I think if you get hemmed in too tight, it's not going to work for you. And then as soon as you realize you can break it, it's gone.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very true. And that's why with my agent, I'm like, I put those things in the calendar, and anytime anything would come up, I would just have to be really hardcore about like, hey, it's Monday and Tuesday, man. I can't do that. I'm not going to do it. And I had to hold him to it. I had to hold me to it. I hold my wife to it. And we all had to just like get on board. Like that's what we're doing in these times. And it's like I said, it's not easy, but that was a massive shift for me because what ends up happening is, and I think all of the research I've heard around deep work, like Cal Newport stuff, and then all the things that a lot of people kind of have explored this with creative work, you can't dip in and out of it. You have to have a good chunk, and that's why, even when I had part-time jobs or more than that, even what would work well is either setting aside 90 minutes at the beginning of the day where there's a good chunk where I'm doing nothing but my creative work, or using that time to set myself up for a larger chunk of time on like Saturday. So yeah, I think that deep work obsession has been helpful.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that it's working for you. And tell me, what is next for you? You've got You're working on picture books. You're still doing your illustrations, got the podcast. You're doing a lot of public speaking from what I can see. What's the future look like for you?
Hopefully sleeping, stuff like that. That's all.
Family time.
Yeah, family time. Video games, more video games. All that. But also I'm doing a project that I don't fully know exactly how it's going to manifest, and it's a little bit more intentionally about my mom and ADHD and positive psychology. And so I've done some like interviews for that I think would work on the podcast, but I'm not sure if they're what should be on the podcast. And then also written a lot of stories around that. So I don't know if that's going to be, I could see it being kind of like a one-person show kind of thing, but I'm not positive about that. Could be a podcast series, could be its own podcast, but I've been working on that. I mean, I've been working on stories around that for years and years and years. And then for the past 2 years, that's been something that's like really been at the forefront of my mind. And I've been kind of, secretly hammering away at it. And so I think something in that vein is going to be a focus at the start of the year next year.
Oh, that is sufficiently intriguing. And I also just really enjoy the fact that you're noodling away with something without having a super clear idea of where it's going to go. You're just kind of following the process.
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was getting at early on about like the weird funk or fog or whatever that I'm in. I feel like when back in like 2011, I did a project, which was a daily character drawing project that turned into the book I released this year called Invisible Things that I co-created with my wife, Sophie Miller. And that project in 2011 was like that, where I was like, I don't know what this is. And it was so uncomfortable. Like that is a difficult place to be in, where you're like, I'm making this thing, no idea what it's for. I don't think anybody wants this. I don't know what it is. Like that's a hard thing to do. And I'm trying to just trust that again, because I feel like I'm in a similar place. And it's been really difficult. But I have seen that trusting that has paid off and been a good practice, even if it's just for yourself personally. I think that that's true.
Good. Trust the process. It's worked for you. It will work again. And I am so excited to see what that manifests to be at some point in the future. But thank you so much for coming on today and having a chat with me. I feel like I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I will let you go.
Thanks for having me, and hopefully we can do it again someday.
Yeah, definitely. And I will make sure that we keep everyone updated with all the things that you're doing. But I also want to say thanks to everyone who has tuned in today to Creativity Uncovered. I really hope that this episode has inspired you. Certainly, I've got a lot of takeaways from it. And then I hope that it helps you summon your creativity the next time that you need it.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you've made it this far, a huge thank you for your support and tuning into today's episode. Creativity Uncovered has been lovingly recorded on the land of the Cubby Cubby people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast has been produced by my amazing team here at Crisp Communications, and the music you just heard was composed by James Gatling. If you liked this episode, please do share it around and help us on our mission to unlock more creativity in this world. You can also hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episode releases.